Nobody in that studio said a word. 12 feet. That was the distance between a 280-pound Soviet Olympic champion and the man he had just called a fake live on national television, in front of a studio audience that had stopped breathing. Imagine you are sitting in the third row of that audience. You came for a talk show. An ordinary Tuesday night in Los Angeles. And then a massive man in a suit starts talking about how Bruce Lee is just an actor, how martial arts demonstrations are theater for people who don't understand real athletics, how any serious wrestler would end the whole thing in about 4 seconds. And nobody, not the host, not the producers, not the 23 people in the studio crew, nobody leans over and says, "Sir, the man you are describing is sitting in that chair right behind you." Nobody says a word, because everyone wants to see what happens next. Welcome back to the channel where the legend lives on. Stay with me, because what happened on that set in November of 1972 is one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of live television. And the story of what the champion said afterward when the cameras were off, that is the part nobody ever tells. Let's go back. Los Angeles, California. November 1972. The show is a late-night talk program on a Los Angeles network affiliate, a well-regarded regional broadcast with a studio audience of 60 people. On this Tuesday night, it has booked 2 guests whose schedules happen to align in a way the producers would spend 30 years describing as the best accident of their careers. The first guest is Dmitry Volkov. He is 31 years old. He stands 6 feet 1 inch tall. He weighs 280 pounds. He won gold at the Munich Olympics 3 months ago, a Greco-Roman wrestling gold medal, the 3rd Olympic medal of a career that has made him, in the specific world of international amateur wrestling, one of the most decorated competitors of his generation. He has been in the United States for 1 week as part of a cultural exchange program. His English is functional. He is comfortable in front of cameras. He also has strong opinions about martial arts. He has trained with martial artists in Moscow, seen demonstrations, and arrived at a conclusion through the logic of an Olympic-level grappler. What passes for martial arts in the popular imagination is largely theatrical. He said as much 3 days before the show, in an interview with a sports magazine. He will say it again tonight. The second guest is Bruce Lee. He is scheduled for the second half of the show, a segment on the making of Enter the Dragon, the Warner Brothers co-production that is currently in post-production, the film that everyone in the entertainment industry has started whispering about. He arrived at the studio 40 minutes before taping and was shown to the green room, where he has been sitting quietly, reading by the account of the production assistant who checked on him twice, while the first segment was set up. He does not yet know who the first guest is. The producers have not connected these 2 dots. The segments were booked independently. The guests arrived separately. Bruce Lee and Dmitry Volkov had been in the same building for 40 minutes without being in the same room. The taping begins at 7:30. Volkov comes out first. The host, a personable man named Gary Kellerman who has been doing this for 12 years and has a gift for making guests comfortable enough to say things they might otherwise keep private, starts with the Olympics, the gold medal, the career. Volkov is relaxed and articulate. The audience likes him. And then Kellerman, because he has done his research and because the sports magazine interview is sitting in his notes, asks the question. He says, "I understand you have some thoughts about martial arts." Volkov smiles. He says, "Yes, I do. If you love Bruce Lee stories, like this video and subscribe. New stories every single day." What Volkov said next, the studio audience heard in real time. Approximately 40 seconds in, one crew member realized something that would make those 6 minutes the most uncomfortable, and then the most extraordinary in the show's history. Volkov said, "The martial arts that Americans see in films, this is performance. Very skilled performance in some cases. Beautiful to watch. But it is theater. The men who practice this, they practice against partners who are cooperating. The fall is agreed. The timing is agreed. The result is agreed." Kellerman said, "So you don't think it would work against a real?" Volkov said, "I think this Bruce Lee, for example. He is talented. Extraordinary athlete from what I understand. Very fast. Very skilled in his discipline. But his discipline is a performance discipline. It is trained against cooperation. I train against resistance. Every session, My partner is trying to defeat me with his full ability. This is different. This produces different capabilities. He leaned forward slightly. He said, I am not disrespecting this man. I am describing a difference in methodology. If he trained the way I train, against full resistance, against opponents who were genuinely trying to defeat him, he would be a different kind of practitioner. Currently, what he does is very impressive. As theater. He leaned back. He said, as a real physical contest against a serious athlete who is actually trying, I think for seconds. Maybe 5 because he is apparently very fast. The audience was very quiet. Not disagreement, the silence of 60 people who had just realized, through a whisper that traveled 12 rows in 30 seconds, that the man being described was in this building. Kellerman was the last person to receive the message. His production manager appeared at the edge of the stage. She spoke in a voice the front rows would later describe as the sound of someone delivering information as fast as accuracy permits. Kellerman walked back to his chair and sat down. He looked at Volkov. He said, with the specific professional composure of a man who has just been handed either a disaster or the best television moment of his career and has not yet determined which. I have to tell you something. Volkov looked at him. Kellerman said, Bruce Lee is here tonight. Pause. He's scheduled for the second segment. Pause. He's been in the green room for the last 40 minutes. Pause. He heard everything. The studio audience made a sound. 60 people, the collective intake of breath, the murmur that travels through a room when something extraordinary has just become visible, the sound of people realizing that they are watching something that does not happen on television. Volkov sat very still. He said, after a moment, in a voice that was careful and even and revealed nothing. I see. Kellerman said. Would you like to meet him? There was a pause that the studio audience experienced as approximately 10 seconds and that the clock recorded as 3. Volkov said yes. Kellerman nodded to someone off stage. And from stage left, moving with the unhurried, complete attention that characterized him in every room he ever entered, Bruce Lee walked out. The studio audience stood up. All 60 of them. Nobody told them to. They just stood. If you love Bruce Lee stories, like this video and subscribe. New stories every single day. Bruce Lee crossed the stage. He looked at Volkov. Volkov looked at Bruce Lee. The size differential was the word the reporter in the audience would use the following week. Almost comic. Almost comic, except that the small man had the bearing of someone approaching a conversation they had been looking forward to, and the large man had the expression of someone rapidly revising several assumptions. Bruce Lee sat down. He looked at Volkov with the complete, unhurried attention that people who trained with him described as the most distinctive quality of his presence. The look of someone who was entirely there, without the social performance that most people produce in front of cameras and audiences. He said, I heard what you said. Volkov said, I know. He said, I want you to know it was not personal. I was describing a methodology. Bruce Lee said, I know. He looked at Volkov for a moment. He said, You're not wrong. The studio audience went completely quiet. Volkov looked at him. Bruce Lee said, Most of what passes for martial arts in films is theater. I make films. I understand the difference between what I do on screen and what I do in the gym. You were describing the screen version. That's an accurate description of the screen version. Volkov was quiet. Bruce Lee said, The question is whether you're also describing the gym version. He said it without any edge in it. As a genuine question. As the tone of someone who is interested in the answer and has no investment in what the answer turns out to be. Volkov looked at him. He said, slowly, I would be interested to find out. The audience made a sound. Kellerman, who had the expression of a man watching his ratings happen in real time, leaned forward and said, Are we about to? Bruce Lee looked at him. He said, Not here. Not tonight. He turned back to Volkov. He said, Come to my gym. Next week. No cameras. No audience. Come and train. 2 hours. After 2 hours, you'll have your answer. And so will I. He looked at Volkov. He said, I learn more from serious people who disagree with me than from anyone else. You are clearly a serious person. Volkov was quiet for a long moment. He said, All right. He extended his hand. Bruce Lee shook it. The 60 people in that studio audience stood up for the second time. The session at the gym took place 8 days later, on a Wednesday morning. There were no cameras, no audience. By mutual agreement, neither man gave a public account of what happened. The gym was the side street in Crenshaw that Bruce Lee used for serious work. No sign on the door, rubber mats, mirrors along one wall. Volkov arrived alone. Bruce Lee was already working when he came in. They trained together for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The only account of what happened comes from a letter that Volkov wrote to his coach in Moscow 3 weeks later. A letter that was translated and published, with Volkov's permission, in a Russian sports magazine in 1984, 12 years after the gym session. The letter said, in part, "I came expecting to test a methodology. What I found was a different methodology entirely. Not inferior, not superior, but operating from a set of principles I had not encountered before. He works from perception rather than from technique. He reads the moment before it happens. I have trained against the best Greco-Roman wrestlers in the world for 15 years. I have never trained against someone who understood what I was going to do before I understood it myself." The letter continued. After 2 hours, I sat down on the mat and I asked him one question. I asked him, "How long did it take you to develop this?" He said, "I am still developing it." I said, "How much longer will it take?" He said, "I will let you know when I get there." I asked, "When will that be?" He looked at me and smiled and said, "Not in this lifetime, most likely. But that is the point. The destination is not the point. The direction is the point." Volkov stayed in Los Angeles for 4 more days after the gym session. He came back to the gym twice more. He returned to Moscow with a notebook full of observations about perceptual training that his coach described, when Volkov showed him, as unlike anything he had seen in the Soviet conditioning literature. They began incorporating principles from those notes into the Soviet wrestling program. In 1974, the Soviet Greco-Roman team outperformed its own historical records at the World Championships. Volkov, in the 1984 magazine piece, did not claim a causal connection between the gym sessions and the 1974 performance. He said only, "I began to pay different attention after those 3 mornings. Whether that made a difference in my team's results, I cannot prove. I can only say that paying different attention changed what I saw. And what you see determines everything that follows." On the television show that night, after Volkov shook Bruce Lee's hand and the audience sat back down and Kellerman composed himself enough to continue the program, the host asked Bruce Lee one last question. He said, "You said you weren't wrong. The man said your work is theater. You agreed." Bruce Lee said, "I agreed about the films. The films are art. Art is one kind of truth. Training is a different kind of truth. Both are real. Neither is the other." Kellerman said, "How do you know the difference?" Bruce Lee said, "The training hurts. The film doesn't." The audience laughed. Bruce Lee waited for the laughter to settle. Then he said quietly, in the way he said the things that lasted, "Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. You put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put it into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." He looked at Volkov. He said, "That works in the gym too." Volkov was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Slowly. Once. The man who walked out of that studio was not the same man who had walked in. Neither was the audience. Neither, frankly, was the host. Gary Kellerman said, in an interview given in 2003, 31 years after that Tuesday night, "I've done over 4,000 episodes. I've had presidents on that stage. I've had Nobel laureates. I've had world champions in every sport you can name. That night, that specific half hour, is the one people still ask me about. Not because of the confrontation, because of what Bruce Lee said after it was over. Because he agreed with his critic, and then he explained why agreeing was not the same as conceding." He paused. "I've been thinking about that distinction for 30 years, he said. "I still haven't finished." Bruce Lee wrote in his journal that winter, "Adapt what is useful, reject what is useless. and add what is specifically your own. He was not writing about film. He was not writing about wrestling. He was writing about the conversation that happens when two serious people, from opposite sides of every relevant divide, sit down in front of 60 witnesses and choose, instead of competition, the thing that is harder and rarer and more valuable. Curiosity. Genuine, mutual, unhurried curiosity. The 280-pound Soviet champion sat in a talk show chair and said Bruce Lee was just an actor. Bruce Lee said, "You're not wrong about the films." And then he said, "Come to the gym." That is not a story about winning. That is a story about what a man of genuine confidence does when he is publicly challenged. Not because he has nothing to prove, but because he understands that proving things is the least interesting option available. If the story moved you, the subscribe button is right there. Because the next story involves a night in a parking lot in Burbank where Bruce Lee made a decision that changed the history of cinema, and nobody knew about it for 30 years. Drop a comment. What would you have done if you were Bruce Lee? Do you stay in the green room, or do you walk out? The legend lives on. If you love Bruce Lee stories, like this video and subscribe. New stories every single day.